it out for me, I'm going to use it. Thanks very much, Judy. Thanks to everybody who's come out on a very grey and cold and windy and wet day. It's much appreciated you take the time to join us. Let's hope the next hour or so we can justify you coming out by giving you something to get involved in, not only in the election but beyond it as well. I want to start off similar to the previous two speakers, to Eileen and Dave, because life is clearly getting harder for people in our city and in our area. And I just briefly want to mention three areas where that's true. First, on the question of unemployment. Official figures put the number of unemployed in Coventry now at around 10,500. But that hides a huge swathe of people who are not counted in those official figures. Apart from the fact there have been dozens of changes to the way in which unemployment figures were calculated from 1979 onwards. It doesn't include, for example, the large number of people who have been driven into part-time work who would otherwise wish to have a full-time job. It doesn't include those people who, through disability or others that Dave was speaking about, are not given the chance to work or have got caring responsibilities. You can probably almost triple the figures of local unemployment. Certainly the TUC commissioned a report a few weeks ago that said nationally the figure was around just over 7 million compared to the 2.5 million that's the official national figure. So on a local basis that was probably similar as well. And within that, two areas are hardest hit. Those who are over 50, for whom getting a job gets in competition with younger people gets harder and harder the nearer you get between 50 and retirement age. And those who are at the younger end of the spectrum. We have youth unemployment of over 20% now in this city. That's an absolute scandal. And I want to pay tribute to one of the campaigns which the Socialist Party and others that are involved in the Trade Unionists and the Socialist Coalition worked so hard with at the end of last year, and that's Youth Fight for Jobs in the recreation of the 75th anniversary of the Jarrah March, walking 330 miles from the northeast of England all the way down to London. Those young people, those teenagers, those students were recreating an important part of our history, but the reason they were having to do that is because that history is revisiting us, and the same problems we thought perhaps were put to bed years ago are coming back. Because when you live in an economy where profit is what determines what gets done and what doesn't get done, if those things aren't making profit, like jobs, because the goods can't be sold that have been created, they're pushed to one side. The council is contributing to that by agreeing with the Tory government to cut 1,000 jobs from this city. That's 1,000 careers which young people in schools today in Coventry cannot aspire to when they come to leave school at 16 or at 18-year-old. The second area is housing. We've got 24,000 on the housing waiting list, the highest it's been since the particular form of records that we have at the moment were started. The council has a target of building, not by itself, of encouraging developers to build 305 rented or affordable housing a year. They're not meeting that target, and they're unlikely to meet it in the next few years. When Jane and I were looking at buying somewhere in the early 1980s, I think the average ratio between the price of a house and people's ordinary wages was about 3 to 1. It's well over twice that now. Even if you could get a deposit, the banks would give you one as a young person. Getting the size of deposit you need to buy a house today is moving away from people, which is why more people need decent rented accommodation. But what's the competition? Last year, these figures are ones I obtained out of the February council meeting. Last year, there was one 3-bedroom house, came up through Home Fire in Radford. There were 752 families chasing that particular home. In the same statistics, I asked what was the longest time anybody's waited on the council house waiting list before they finally got a house. January 1974. 38 years on official records of Coventry City Council before last year that person finally got some social housing. Then you have, allied with that, the question of homelessness. And we have people in the audience here today who have first-hand experience of that from both sides of the equation. But the council has recently cut the staffing and the facilities to deal with those who are making applications. I know from one case only yesterday of somebody, a vulnerable person, who went to the council to ask for help and has been told they face at least a 3-week wait before they're allocated a caseworker, before anybody can look at their application for homelessness. Now, what sort of city are we living in, where we get all this fuss about 5% tax being knocked off millionaires and all the angst about their problems in society, and nobody is raising the basic bread and butter issues of unemployment, of housing, that ordinary working class families are facing life in this city. The last little area I just want to briefly mention is what I think we're witnessing, which is the slow death of comprehensive education in this city. Coventry was proud in the 1960s, under Labour councillors like Dave Nellist, sadly passed away last year, one of the prime movers of comprehensive education in this town. Of secondary schools now, a third of them have gone down the route of academies. That was something that was invented and brought in by Labour and accelerated by the Tories. And up until very recently, the Labour Council's official position was an agnostic one. It didn't matter what sort of school, how it was organised, how it related to the rest of the schools in the city. The council would work with whatever providers came along. Now, we raised a petition against that, forced a debate in front of the Cabinet Member for Education, got a minor change made to that policy. So now, if Michael Gove in London forces a school to go down the route of becoming an academy, then the Labour Council would oppose that. It's not enough. That fragmentation, that competition which is coming in education, if there are going to be successes in education, and I'm sure one or two of these academies will become successes, the quid pro quo is there will be failures, because education now is totally funded by the number of pupils that go to that particular school. They carry on their backs the funding with them. If more are attracted to a popular academy school, that means another school is going to suffer by not having the necessary funding. And if we had more time, we could go into the situation about repairs. It's something which Labour criticises the Tories of, leaving our schools in disrepair in this city. But their programme, by the way, what was called Building Schools for the Future, carried around it a millstone of PFI, of private funding of that education, would be left with a load of mini Walsgrave hospitals. And you don't have to say much more. You always say, the experience of the RMT with rail track and privatisation in the railways. Now in health, they're importing that into education as well. 600 families at the last count couldn't get a place in a local school. Now, it's posted in the Telegraph, they've got their second or third choice. I've taken up cases of people who live in the middle of the St Michael's who are walking 4 times a day over to Stoke Oldham, or walking 4 times a day over to Bradford, because that's the allocation that they were given. We warned Labour of this when, in parochial terms at St Michael's, they closed St Mary's School on Sky Blue Way. We told them, if you take what you call excess or surplus places out of the primary system, it won't be long before there are waiting lists, not just for houses, not just for operations, but now to get into a local school. Another illustration. Now, those issues, alongside ones which I'm only going to deal with in terms of headlines, like safety, the shared spaces that we've tried to raise on the council in recent weeks, green spaces, the battles we've had in Charterhouse or the back of the Belgrave, generally about the environment. We led the opposition to the new incinerator and the PFI incinerator on the city council, and successfully campaigned, for example, for the introduction of plastic recycling. It's not something we get a lot of credit for, but that was something we achieved on the council as well. To the community issues like residential parking and achieving, for example, in Charterhouse, the largest free residential parking scheme on a 5-day basis anywhere in the city. It's on a 6-year free basis at the moment. Hardly anywhere else has got to. Now, those aren't election issues that we just invent 3 months before an election. That's the bread and butter work of a party that's rooted in communities, that's working with trade union members, that's doing those things week in, week out. And therefore we have, I think, the right when we come along to an election to say, that's what we've achieved, that's what we've tried to fight for, we'll do more if we're given the chance. You can see what we're made of. And a lot of those things, by the way, the opposition to academies, the spaces, the question of Charterhouse fields, those things simply would not have happened if the Socialist Party have not been active in this city, particularly in electoral politics. Now, the other half of what I want to say is a bit broad and not taking the national issues too far away from what I know Alex wants to say, particularly in relation to the elections in London and the role of the government nationally. But those issues, in a sense, are all subsumed by the enormity of the cuts that's heading towards us. I say heading towards us because we're halfway through the Parliament, but as has already been mentioned by Eileen, we're not halfway through the cuts. In sort of monetary terms, the Tories in London have said to Coventry, you must cut £146 million from council spending over a 5-year period. So far, 60 million has been voted through the council. But we haven't yet seen the full impact of last year's cuts, never mind the recently voted cuts in February. So, for example, out of last year's cuts was the money to cut 6 of the 20 Sure Start centres and to reduce care from all-day care in the nurseries down to sessional care, and ended it completely for the under-2s. So we've had 40% of the announcement of cuts, but so far only 20% of the impact. So if you think what the Tories have done and Labour have agreed with, regretfully, in this city is bad, there's 80% more than the 20% we've had still to come. That should fire up any election campaign. But of course, what do we get in the election campaign at the moment? It was in the Observer a couple of nights ago. Apparently, Labour's main target in this election is St Michael's, is to get rid of a single socialist on the council. They've obviously run out of Tories in Coventry who chase them around. They have to spend their time in St Michael's. And their message is one, a massive one, of Tories are bad, we're not the Tories. That sums up what Labour's saying. They want to inherit the election in 2015 by just being seen as not the Tories when they get there. The reality is because when it comes to the council debates, like in February, when £17 million worth of cuts were put forward by Labour, the Tories argued with about 10 or 11% the detail as how to achieve that 17 million. They disagreed with the target, just with how it was going to be achieved. That's the mirror image of what's taking place in London. The Tories put forward cuts of £100 billion. Labour doesn't disagree with the direction of cuts, merely a little bit with the pace of how that's to be achieved. Immortally summed up a week or so ago by Mark Steele, who said that the Tories are making vicious cuts, the Liberal Democrats are checking the spelling before they vote for the cuts, and Labour's saying, well, we've met the same cut, but we wouldn't have met them until the afternoon, you know. It's about that much amount of difference. But one thing that couldn't have been made up by Mark Steele is what happened at the beginning of April, when the leader of the council, John Mutt, the deputy leader of the council, George Douglas, spending a lot of time in St Michael's at the moment, took a night off from canvassing for Labour at St Michael's to go down to London to pick up an award for the Cuts Council of the Year. It sounds like it's off Father Ted, but it's real. There's actually an award by the Improvement and Efficiency Council of something or other, a government department, which looks at how the cuts have been implemented by local councils, who's got away with it the best, and awarded to Coventry the target and title of Cuts Council of the Year. Now, I hear that Sure Start staff were dancing in the streets when that took place. Low-pay council workers denied any form of wage increase for a 5-year period. Wanted to personally thank Cable and Wireless for sponsoring the event, and the cuts consultant PricewaterhouseCoopers, who were being given £9 million by this Labour Council to work out how to make the cuts, offered to donate their fees to charity. Actually, I made that last one up. Now, if the Tories, if Labour's promise in its election leaflets, only it could beat the Tories, was to be taken at face value, I have to say it is meaningless. If replacing Labour by the Tories means the same cuts are taken, what honest use is it of having 54 Labour and Tory councillors on that council from next Thursday, which is the prospect which they wish to do. Now, it doesn't have to be that way. The third and last area I want to briefly mention is what could be done. And it'll have to be in shortened form, but hopefully in questions or in other contributions, people can fill these points out. Now, we've made the point before. The council has reserves, £40-odd million. It used £11 million of them in order to fund part of the voluntary redundancy and early retirement programme, actually to get rid of staff. So it's not against using the reserves, it's just against using them for any bloody useful purpose. What they could have done, and this is, even if they wouldn't agree to sufficiently avoiding all the cuts in a year by using enough reserves, they could have used reserves in a targeted way. Let's say Fosal. The allegation is Fosal was costing £250,000 a year, therefore the baths have to be rebuilt over at 80-70 without stealing military bills and thunder. Our objection to that is not that we don't want to see a new swimming baths allied to the 87 sector, but it will serve a different group of people in the city than those who live in the community of Fosal. It will serve people who've got cars and shop at Sainsbury's and nip into a leisure centre while they're up shopping at Sainsbury's, in exactly the same way as the closure of the Holbrook Library and its transfer to Tesco serves an entirely different group of people in the city. Those who use cars to go to Tesco at the arena and do their shopping and pop into the library whilst they live there. They could have used a few £100,000 to say, look, we'll buy 2 years, we will fund an extra 2 years of the Fosal Leisure Centre, and in return we ask you, the community, to join with us, the council, in campaigning against the cuts in London and asking for sufficient money to get decent leisure services. Now, that said, I have a quite simple solution. I wouldn't have put £11 billion on the Olympics. I'd have found 1,100 villages, towns and cities in this country, give them all £10 million each, and said, go away and build a new leisure centre, build a new baths, build a new athletics track, because that would have meant more to young people than watching the telly for 14 days. To be honest about it, watching Usain Bolt do 100 metres in 9.5 seconds or whatever he's going to achieve, there'll be 60,000 people who can afford 40, 50, 70, 100, 200, 500,000 pounds or whatever it is to watch it in person. The rest of us will watch it on telly. We can watch it on telly whether it's in Paris or Peking. It doesn't matter. We still watch it on telly. So why are we spending £11 billion on what is essentially an advertising spree for big companies to sell products for the next 6 months? Well, we could be spending it on genuine facilities for health and sport in areas. So Labour Council could have come up with something like that, an idea where they won the support and worked with local people rather than against them. The same point could have been made about Sure Start nurses. They could have found ways of bringing communities, council staff, people who rely on those services alongside the council, campaign against the villains in London, but instead of that, they not only implement those cuts without any form of resistance, but the only time they do anything about going to London is to go get an award for how good they are at making the cuts. Now, it's been different in the past. I haven't got time to go through the real classic of ones of Liverpool, Play Cross and Poplar. Hopefully people will help me out and raise a couple of those in the body of the meeting. I'll just give you a local one. 1976. I joined the Labour Party a couple of years earlier than that. We had a Labour government then. We had the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, coming in saying they wanted billions of pounds worth of cuts from health, education, welfare, social services. And the Labour government at the time implemented those cuts, a bit like the Tory government today is implementing the cuts of the bankers. Arthur Waugh Senior, who's then the Labour Council, not the most left-wing person we've all come across, organised a conference in St Mary's Hall and invited every Labour authority in the country to come and have a concerted joint agenda of resistance against the cuts of all local authorities against the government. We organised a march around the town, about 1,500 people. We were led by Bill Wilson, my predecessor in Parliament, by Alan Fisher, who then ran the NUPE, the Dave Nellist the day of Unison's equivalent in 1976, and a young lad called Tony Sanwar. I don't really know what happened to him. That's an in-joke for those who've been in the Socialist Party long enough to know the CWIs. 1,500 people walked around the town and ended up outside the St Mary's in support of a Labour council doing its job, representing local people against the government. Now, can you imagine that today? Can you imagine Bob Ainsworth leading a march round Coventry? Can you imagine the leaders of Unison or one or two of those other big unions affiliated to the Labour Party doing that? Their only aspiration now is not so much resisting the cuts that have been brought in, but of a managed decline. They want to be in charge of making cuts rather than anybody else doing it. That's got to change. Those of you in unions who are affiliated with the Labour Party have to grasp this nettle, this historic 100-year-old nettle, that what the RMT, or the Society of Railway Servants as they were 112 years ago, did by hosting and being at the birth of the Labour Party itself, because nobody could tell the difference between the Tories and the Liberals at the day. We have to do that same job today, which is why the Trade Unionist and Socialist Coalition is so important as a way of bringing trade unionists and activists together. Now, to finish, Chair, we in this campaign reject entirely the arguments for cuts in pensions, wage freezes, cuts in services. We don't accept the working people caused the crisis that erupted in 2008. Capitalism itself is inherent in periodic crises. What triggers those crises changes time to time. In the 70s it was the oil shock. This time round it was the gambling and speculation of the bankers in the housing and the derivative markets. The trigger may change, but the lust for profit by a tiny number of people at the top of society is what drives these problems, and we reject that our families should pay for that. There is an alternative. The Tories want to cut about £100 billion off every year's spending in the public sector. A chap called Richard Murphy works for a body called Tax Justice, done some work for several trade unions, has gone through all the accounts of companies and individuals nationally and worked out there's about £120 billion a year which is avoided or evaded and should be paid in tax, but isn't because of relocation of people's tax affairs abroad. You know, we're socialist left-wingers are often accused of being unpatriotic. What's more unpatriotic than these business people locating their accounts in the Cayman Islands or in Jersey or Guernsey or Bahamas or wherever it is in order to avoid paying their fair share of society's costs? It's worse than that. 98 of the top 100 companies in this country have done that. Barclays in the news this week because of Bob Diamond's £17.5 million payments last year. 400 of their top executives have had their employment contracts relocated to an offshore subsidiary of a Dutch company so that both for employment reasons and financial and accountancy reasons they're not subject to the law of the land. Deloitte, an accounts firm, about 2 months ago brought out a report that said the biggest companies in Britain are sitting on £731 billion of cash because they don't think if they make something they could sell it and realise a profit. Part of the reason for that is in a recession, when you cut and you drive down people's living standards and wages, they're even less able to buy back the things that they've created. Less able in capitalism anyway, but even less able when the wages and living conditions are being driven down. £731 billion is over 7 years of the target of the government in cuts. So whether it's taxing the rich properly so that their wealth is used by the majority of society rather than a tiny minority, whether it's saying these big companies, if they're refusing to use that profit that they've made out of us, then we should go back to some old ideas of nationalisation, of expropriation, what the Argentinians have done to their oil assets over the past couple of weeks, and bring that money and those assets into public use so it can be used properly for ordinary people, their families and their needs. What stops that happening is we haven't got the vehicle politically that's trusted by enough people, to elect enough people, to be part of campaigns of resistance that can actually have a viable vehicle with that sort of socialist agenda. We face an overlapping agenda by the big three parties, and by all reporting on the BBC or wherever, that's deemed to be the only explanation in town. There is no other alternative, as Mrs. Thatcher used to say in the 1980s, but in a slightly different context. That's why, whatever it is, a campaign, an election or whatever, we have worked as a party for 15 years now to say to active trade unionists, you must grasp this nettle of finding a way to an independent political voice for ordinary working people again, as we had, warts and all, 30 or 40 years ago, when at least between Labour you could tell the difference between Labour and Tory. You watch a TV interview now with any MP that you don't know the name of under the age of 40, and I guarantee it's not until the bar comes underneath that name you can tell, is that Labour, is it Tory, or is it Liberal Democrat. There is no difference in the message which they're putting forward. So the trade unionists and Socialist coalition, which Alex is heading in the London Assembly elections, to my view, is the best vehicle we have so far seen for bringing together the RMT, the FBU, the UCU, the NUT, a number of other trade unions, mostly linked by the fact they're non-affiliated to the Labour Party, but also leading officials in some of those who are. Now for this election, we want you to consider getting involved in that project as well. Let me finish with this last sentence or so. We've got a 30-year history in this town in standing in elections as socialists. I've had 14 years on the council. Rob had about 8 when we were together there. We don't have to, in a sense, make promises, because we've got a record, whether it's sharing the living standards of those we represent, whether it's been uncompromising in putting forward socialist ideas and defending communities. We have a record of which I think as a party we're justly proud. We want to extend that and expand that and make it such a part of the political furniture in this town that not a debate can take place without the genuine ideas of working class socialism being part of that debate. We can't do that alone. We can only do that if more people consider joining us, particularly within the Socialist Party, but working within the main projects that we have, like Youth Like Good Jobs, like the National Shop Stewards Network, and in particular in the electoral context, like the Trade Union and Socialist Coalition. So we've got candidates in every part of Coventry. Where are you from? In 17 of the 18 wards, there's a Socialist alternative candidate. We're supporting Bill in Fosel as an independent campaigner from the community, defending services and the leisure centre in Fosel, and ask you to vote for Bill if you're in that area. Join us, help us in the campaign in the last few days. Join us in this party and help us build something that can restore to working people and their families a real prospect of hope, that life could be different. If we don't do that, then those of us like me, heading rapidly towards 60-year-olds in a few weeks' time, and you're all invited, by the way, we'll give the details of the party later on. But those of our generation, who grew up in the 50s and the 60s, with those who went through the 30s, were part of, my mum and dad said this to me, I'm sure yours said this to you, that what they wanted out of life was to make sure they could hand on a better life for their children than what they'd gone through in the past. We could be the first generation which cannot promise that to the next generation of young people unless we take the control of resources, of money, of the way in which society ticks, out of the millionaires and the billionaires who control it at the moment, and put it in the hands of ordinary working people. That, I think, is something worth not just voting for on Thursday, but joining something, getting involved and making sure it happens. Thanks ever so much for listening.